So thank you. Yeah, welcome to the workshop on how to prepare manuscripts for submission and how to actually handle revisions to JHTM. Yep. So when Mariana first asked me to actually design a workshop for today's session, yeah, I was thinking, should this be a very technical workshop on trying to help you to get your manuscripts approved and published in JHTM? Yep. Or should this workshop be more about giving you the tools to actually how to go about designing and setting up your manuscript such that you're well prepared for submission to JHTM. So I guess looking at the different sort of delegates in this room, I just want to ask a question. First, just by starting off, how many of you guys in this workshop has submitted manuscripts to JHTM previously? Yeah, so if you can kind of like have a thumbs up or a show of hands that you have submitted manuscripts to JHTM before. So I just want to know my audience a bit better. Yeah. Yeah, I know, Reka, you have done it before. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Okay. All right. So about half, yes, about half of you guys have submitted manuscripts to JHTM before. So very good. All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you for keeping us busy, for keeping me busy and Mustafa busy. Yep, with your manuscripts. But more importantly, thank you for choosing JHTM to publish your quality research. So that's good. I guess this helps a lot because I'm actually preaching to the converted here. Then, all right. Okay. So this workshop, yep, I just wanted to kind of share with you what we're going to cover today. Yep, don't be alarmed. It looks like a lot, okay, but I guarantee you it's more of, there's not too many slides. We're not going to do a death by PowerPoint presentation here, though, okay? But this is roughly the agenda that we're going to cover today. Yeah, give you some background about JHTM, the typical review process, the high standards of JHTM, and then we go into some tips about the different sections of a manuscript for JHTM. Yep, and then more importantly, towards the end, it's about how do we handle reviewer feedback. Okay, I think that's something that we are all very interested in. Yep, and something that some of us don't actually manage that too well. Okay, so I'll share some of my experience as well as a researcher, as an associate editor, and all right, we have some fun there, okay? All right, so, so a bit of a kind of background and statistics about JHTM, as our chief editor, Mariana kind of mentioned earlier on. JHTM impact factor has been increasing over the years. Currently it sits at 5.9, which is very high, which is good. And it's currently ranked 17 out of 58 journals in hospitality, leisure, sports, and tourism. It's ranked 61 out of 226 journals in management. On average, JHTM receives about 100 plus submissions per month. That explains why Mustafa and myself have been so busy. Okay. The acceptance rate for JHTM is somewhere about 12 to 15%. And the rejection rate is about 87%. So obviously the quality is very important to us. And the average review time on average is about 6 weeks. For the review process of JHTM manuscripts. So this is a bit of the background about JHTM. I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with this. Next, the typical JHTM review process. And I think this is important because this helps you to manage your expectations when you submit your manuscripts to JHTM. Like all top tourism and hospitality journals, there's a very rigorous and stringent review process in place. So as you can see, we receive the manuscript. And the chief editor actually determines the suitability. So Professor Mariana, she would actually decide if it's to be desk rejected or not. And if she deems that yes, there's some merit in this paper, and then it's being passed on to one of the associate editors. So it could be Mustafa, Emily, or myself. And then we select a minimum of 2 reviewers, send out for review. Yep. And then the authors are informed of the decision, where there's three decisions: accept, revise, or reject. And then if there's a revised decision, authors actually get an opportunity to revise and make changes and resubmit within 4 weeks. And then the process repeats itself. Okay, but ultimately we actually hope that we can actually accept your manuscripts, because we know there's lots of hard work put into this. Okay, so this is the very typical review process of most journals, in fact. Yeah, but this is from a JHTM perspective, this is what we actually go through. Okay. Yep. So one of the big things that of JHTM, and to help you to prepare your manuscript, is that JHTM is regarded as a high quality impact journal, impact factor of 5.9, as we mentioned earlier on. And right at the upfront, I would like to say that there is actually no shortcuts in publishing in JHTM, because that's one of the frequent questions that we are always being asked. It's like, what's the fastest way to publish in JHTM? It's like, so there are no shortcuts, and I would like to perhaps kind of reiterate the high standards of JHTM with these 5 attributes. Yep. So the 5 attributes and criteria. Number 1, the relevance needs to be there. Yep. So the manuscripts should relate to JHTM's aim and scope. So if you're unsure of the aims and scope of JHTM, look at the website. Very importantly, the manuscripts must show relevance to previously published research and industry practice within the field of tourism, travel, hospitality, leisure, and management. Yeah, and we'll talk more about this later on. And number 2 is about the significance of contribution to theory and practice. Yep, manuscript must make a significant new contribution to the body of knowledge, and of course, to actually provide valuable insights and implications to industry. And number 3, very important, and this is what the previous session talked about, the chief editors of various top journals mentioned, is about having a good level of originality in your research. Yeah, so the manuscripts must reflect or should reflect a novel and original research idea, and that can advance our knowledge, all right, by studying a new phenomenon or studying existing phenomena in new ways and approaches. Okay, that's the 3rd criteria. And number 4, it needs to be rigorous and robust. Yep, especially in the methodology. Yep, as I always say, you can never ever hide a poor method. So it's very obvious to have a well-balanced method. And we'll talk about this later on. And more importantly, yep, it's about the high quality presentation and communication. How do you actually, put together your awesome research project right into, a 6,000, 7,000 words research manuscript, yeah, that is clearly articulated, that is clear to understand, yeah, and that the readability is of a high standard. Yeah, and that's what is very important. So these are the 5 key criteria of meeting the high standards of JHTM. Yeah, and once again, there are no shortcuts. Okay, all right. So the first tips, yeah, about preparing your manuscript for JHTM is really about the very first page itself. Yeah, so and I actually bring this, break this down into the very basic title, abstract, and keywords page. Yeah, so don't forget, the associate editors, chief editors, and reviewers are all human beings as well. So the first page needs to be captivating. Yep, and it starts off with a brilliant title. Yeah, and there are lots of research have been conducted about what is a good title, what sort of title can maximize impact and so on. Yep. But to me, a good title is a title that needs to be engaging and clearly reflect the key contributions. Yep. As you can see, this is one of our recent paper that we submitted. Yep. And I actually thought of this title. Yeah, so the research team wanted a very conservative title, but I felt that, hey, you need to have some a catchy twist to it. And I actually thought about, hey, what a load of rubbish. Yep, and it worked. And this is a title that is very catchy, catches attention, but at the same time, it then explains what this research is about. Yep, so I always believe that in the title itself, yep, you should actually allow the chief editor and the associate editors and the reviewers to have a quick snapshot of what your research is about. Yep, that's why it needs to be clear, catchy. Yep, and then it's followed by your abstract. Okay, so in your abstract, there's many different ways to write a good abstract. Yep, but I normally use this. I call this the 5W and 1H approach. Yep. So the what, why you're doing this research, who's the target market, the sample group, when do you conduct this research, where and how. Yeah. Within the abstract, there needs to be some indication of any theoretical and managerial contributions. Yeah, this could be a 1 or 2 liners. Okay. And more importantly, in your abstract, you need to clearly position the paper. Yeah. So last thing you want is for someone to read the abstract and they have no idea what this paper is about. Okay. As Sarah mentioned in the previous presentation, it's all about keeping it nice, simple, professional, and impactful. Yeah. Don't try to overdo the abstract. Yep, it needs to be simple to understand, yet impactful. That's what matters most. Okay, and the keyword is very important as well. All right, always select 4 to 5 keywords that clearly reflects the scope of research that you're looking at. Okay, the last thing you want is to have a very generic keywords such as, oh, this is about tourism, hospitality, or tourism management. Yep, it doesn't signify anything. Okay, so that's the very first tips I would do is on the very first page itself, have a catchy title, is engaging, good, strong abstract, and clear keywords that really identifies and position what your paper is about. Okay, and then next, the second tip is about, as Mariana mentioned in the previous presentation, is about how do you demonstrate credibility and relevancy. So don't forget, yeah, when you submit your paper, as I mentioned earlier on, JHTM receives close to 100 plus submissions per month. Yep. So you can imagine the amount of manuscripts that we actually go through. Yep. So some of the things we look out for. Yep. Initially, when you submit your paper to JHTM, the first thing that we actually look out for is the fit with the scope and mission of JHTM. Yep. At the bare minimum, yep, the research needs to relate to the wider tourism sector. Yep. So it needs to relate to hospitality, tourist operations, events, festivals, cruise, and so on. So there needs to be some relevance to our discipline and field of research. Yeah. Then number 2, something to also think about is sometimes, yep, we tend to make our paper too generic and not relevant enough. Yep. So we should avoid that. Yep. So how do we know that if our paper is too generic? Yep. Is that when your paper could be easily submitted to other journals as well. All right. Besides hospitality and tourism. So that's when you know that the relevancy of your paper is not focused and targeted enough for the hospitality and tourism discipline. Yep, and you'd be surprised. Yep, I'm not sure about Mustafa, but I've actually came across papers that have been submitted to JHTM whereby the manuscripts do not even contain the word tourism or hospitality. Okay, so that's something to really bear in mind. It's about making sure your paper is relevant, right, to JHTM. Okay, and when we mention about relevancy, it's not simply just about citing some tourism and hospitality papers. And this is what we see quite often. People simply just cite some of the hospitality and tourism past papers, and then they assume that by doing that, their paper is relevant to hospitality and tourism. Yeah. So another way to establish credibility and relevance in tourism and hospitality is that you need to be critical and engaged with the past literature in tourism and hospitality. Yeah. So that's something very important. It's about, you really need to have a good lit review coverage to ensure that you cover the essence, all right, of hospitality and tourism past literature. Yeah. And of course, you can also demonstrate credibility as what Marianne mentioned, that by demonstrating that you have a good understanding and a critical reflection of the current state of the tourism knowledge and industry of the area that you're looking in. All right. So don't be a fence sitter, but you must be able to say, be able to critique, what has been published, yep, and what has not been published, and therefore you must have your own flavor and stance, all right, to actually demonstrate that and justify why your research is significant and credible. Okay, so that's something we look at. And I always bring back to the first page as well. Yep, within the first page, you must be able to, justify, contextualize, and offer this critical reflection, all right, to actually demonstrate your credibility and relevancy of your research. All right, if you miss the first page, yep, there's a very high chance that the paper will not even pass the desk rejection stage. Okay, so that's something very important to bear in mind. Yep. Okay. Next, something very important is on the theoretical and practical contributions. And this is something you'll see happening more and more often. That's coming out, especially right in the top tourism and hospitality journals. Yep. And I actually call this the so what question. Yep. So you have to ask yourself when you actually write up your manuscript. Yep. Especially in the theoretical and practical sections. Yep. Ask yourself this question of the so what. You have done the research. Okay. So what's the contribution there? Okay. And you'll be amazed that most of the time we don't really know what is the key contribution of the paper. That yes, it sounds awesome, it's a fantastic idea, it's impactful, but what's the actual contribution of this stuff? Okay. And sometimes there needs to be a good balance. Sometimes we see there are lots of emphasis on the theoretical contribution, extending of the framework of the model, new theories, and so on. But there is no practical contributions. Yeah, there is no value for the industry. Yeah, and on the other hand, we have also seen paper whereby it's a highly applied practical paper. The industry would love this sort of paper, helps to increase revenue for companies, but then again, it doesn't really contribute and extends the body of knowledge. So there needs to be a good balance. Yep. So what exactly is theoretical contributions? Yep. I would say that it's really based and judged on what we already know. Yep. And what the new impact and contribution your submission adds to the field of knowledge. Yep. As Sarah pointed out earlier on in the presentation, just because no one has looked at it before, it does not mean that it's a significant contribution. Yeah, there might have been good reasons for not actually looking at certain areas of theory or in the field of knowledge. Okay, so that's something important to bear in mind. Number two is about the practical contribution. Yep. So what exactly is practical contribution? Yeah. From my perspective, practical contribution is generally evaluated by the business relevance for the industry itself. Yep. How useful would your study be for the industry? Yep. And this could also be explicated by the provision of meaningful and actionable managerial implications. Yep. So what can managers of this industry do with your results, of your findings? What improvements can we do for the industry? Okay, so that's important as a practical contribution. Yeah. And this is something we have to stress that there are many times whereby the reviewers and the associate editors, right, we have to kind of search and try to guess, yeah, what exactly is the theoretical and practical contributions. Yep. So I think it's very important to emphasize that it is the author's responsibility to ensure, yeah, that the readers actually learn something new from the manuscript. Yep. And it needs to be well articulated and positioned, yeah, such that the readers and the reviewers do not have to guess, what exactly is the contribution. Okay, so this is something I would strongly encourage, is that when you're writing up your theoretical and practical contributions, be explicit and direct. Okay, because this is what you want to be proud of. This is your contribution of the manuscript. So it needs to be hard and strong. Yep, and it needs to be something that be very clear on this. Okay, all right. So if you look at this bottom here, some of the things that I would say the best to avoid when you are talking about your theoretical contributions or practical contributions in your manuscript is that don't just try to copy a previous study. Oh, because this study was conducted in China, therefore we're going to try and test it in Australia. Okay. Yes, maybe there might be some practical contributions for the industry in Australia. Yeah, but is it really significant enough? Yeah. Okay. I think the answer to me is no. Yep. Yep. Sometimes we tend to just kind of borrow theories from different disciplines and just apply it in hospitality and tourism, and then we call that, oh, that's a key contribution to theory and knowledge in the discipline there. Yep. Which to some extent is true, but is it really significant enough? The answer, I think, is no. Yeah. So I think you just have to be a bit more critical and be a bit more mindful about your theoretical contributions. And we have seen lots of recently, especially, we have seen lots of submissions through systematic review papers. So not sure about Mustafa, but I've received quite a few in the last couple of months. And systematic review papers are awesome. I love it. Yep. It really summarizes, conceptualizes, synthesizes, the field of knowledge in a certain area. Yep. But one thing that we actually try not to do is that the systematic reviews. Yep. There needs to be some contribution, whether it's about advancing, systematic review theories. Yep. Or is it really about what is the practical contributions of the systematic review papers? More often than not, we actually see systematic review papers as highly descriptive of a who did what and so on, which we need to avoid. Okay. All right. So this is some tips about how to actually what to look out for in terms of setting the scene for your theoretical and practical contributions. Yeah. The next one is about your lit review. Yep. And it's quite interesting. When we look at lit review, we actually I spend lots of time doing my lit review because of going through past studies in this area. Yep. But generally, I would advise that researchers actually spend more time in the lit review, because in the lit review itself, you actually identify lots of gaps. All right, I call this the sort of the golden nuggets. Yep, in past papers who actually have limitations or gaps in those papers that could actually be your theoretical contributions. Okay, so there are some things that I would advise in terms of the when you're writing up your lit review. Yep, is number one, it needs to be relevant and critical. Yep, avoid during the who did what approach. Yeah, and that's something that we see very common. All right, they list out all like maybe 10 or 12 different papers, and then they just go through say, all right, Edmund 2021, reported and did this. Mustafa 2020 reported and did this, and the list goes on. Yep. And at the end of the whole lit review, the question I always ask is, so what was the critical aspects of the lit review though? Yes, we know past studies have did this, done that, but so what? Okay. All right. So it needs to be relevant and needs to be critical. Yep. It needs to inform and guide the paper. That's something that I think we see that it's not really happening as much as we want to. Yeah. So the lit review sometimes tends to be very unstructured. There's no subheadings. Yeah, it's just one chunk of past papers that's been conducted before, and then the authors try to give it some meaning to their papers. Yep. So the lit review needs to actually inform and help guide the paper though. Yep. And one of the best ways that I normally recommend is to group your literature, yep, using subheadings. So it's very clear that what you are trying to position your paper about. Okay. All right. Of course, please use updated references. And that's something I'm amazed, yeah, sometimes as well when I see manuscripts that have an awesome research idea, and then when it comes to lit review, yeah, the manuscripts, looks at what reviews that have references that are 10 years old and beyond. Yeah, so and that is to me, one of my sort of alarm bells that goes up. Oh, okay, was this research actually conducted recently, or was this actually done a while ago? Yeah. Okay. So please always use updated references. Okay. It just shows currency and shows that your research is contemporary. Okay. Theoretical framework. Yep. Is something that I normally advise to use. Yep. So you can actually show a theoretical framework or a diagram or a series of steps or stages like what I've included here, all right, to help position and guide your literature review. Yep. More often than not, yep, if you had a conceptual framework, yep, the concepts within the framework, yep, should be explained in your lit review. Yep. So, because don't forget, a lit review is all about reviewing literature that is relevant to your study. Yep. So naturally, yep, all of these literature should cover some of the attributes or the constructs or variables that you are proposing in your model. Okay. Yep. Grouping the literature, that's something I always do. So one of the things I always advise is that yes, you have gone through all the literature, relevant literature, you have digested them. Okay. So how do you actually segment and group your literature? Yep, I always do that by grouping them into a few different groups or segments. Yep, and by doing that, one, you are having some originality in your research through the lit review as well. Okay, and number two, you are actually demonstrating to the reviewers and the editors that yes, you have actually synthesized and you have actually understood, yep, and critically reflected on the literature. Yeah, and that is so important. Yeah, it's like what does the literature actually tells you? It tells us. Okay. Consensus and contradictions in the literature, that's something that I would also advise, because when you are writing for a top journal like JHTM, one of the things we actually look out for is we actually want to know that what are your thoughts on the literature after conducting the review. Yep. So many times, we will see a literature review that is very, we call this the very vanilla type of lit review, whereby you just go through the motions of who did what, and then there's no really critical reflection of what is your stance on this. What are some of the critical issues that are missing in the literature? Right. So we actually want to see some impact from you about what are your thoughts on the literature review. Yeah. what are some of the consensus out there? What are some of the contradictions? Yep, and of course, through contradictions, that's always good because you can come up with limitations and research gaps. Okay, so that's something I would advise, when you're writing up your lit review for JHTM, is to make sure that you are critical in your lit review. Yep, give it some flow and grouping or segments of your literature review. All right, and always try to include some form of a theoretical framework, a diagram, a table or summary or something. All right, just to show that you have actually critically reviewed the literature. Yeah, so that's very important. All right, okay. And then the next we have is methods. Yep, and my tips on research design and methodology. Yep, and I always say this, that you can never ever hide a poor methods. Yep, it's just so obvious that you have not thought about a good method. Yep. So first of all, in terms of your research design, is always to check, to see if there's sufficient evidence that your study has followed and rigorously applied an appropriate and robust research methodology. All right. Have you discussed adequately about how do you selected your sample size, the sample group? Yeah. How do you go about collecting your data? Was there a procedure involved? Yeah. What were the variables that you use? How do you decided on which variables to use? Yeah. How do you develop your hypotheses? Yeah. Are you using qualitative, quantitative? If yes, have you checked the robustness? Yeah. So there's quite a lot of things to look at, and of course, sometimes we just simply go through the motions, and we just simply go through a checklist, especially we see that very often in the quantitative methodology approach, whereby it's just a checklist of ensuring the parameters are good, ensuring that the significance tests are within certain boundaries. Yeah, but there is no really there's not really a thought process in it. It's very mechanical. Yep. Of course, we understand that there is no study with a perfect methodology. Yep. However, when a study is wrong by design, yeah. And what do we mean by this? So, for example, if you are conducting exploratory research, not many people have done that before, and this is something that you have been positioning in your paper, and then you conduct survey questionnaires. Yeah. So this is we call this a wrong fit for design. Yeah. And because of the wrong fit for design, right, it cannot be fixed by simply just redoing it. Okay. All right. So, and if this happens, then this is a very good reason for rejection. So always make sure that the research method that you have chosen, all right, is the right intended fit for your research design. Yeah, like what Kathy Sue and Sarah mentioned earlier on. Yep, it's not about complicating your research methodology. It's about using the simplest methods, which are valid, which are suitable, the best suitable methods for your research. Yep, and I must say, over the last few years, we have seen lots of papers that are really based on structural equation modeling. Okay, those papers are good. Yeah, but then the big question of the why questions sometimes are not really addressed. So don't be too tempted to simply use the latest fancy type of research methodology. All right, if it does not answer your research question and design. Okay, all right. One of the tips is the majority of the rejected submissions are due to a conceptually and methodologically weak research design. Yep. So with limitations in the areas of things like poor research questions, yep, hypotheses and models. So sometimes we tend to see some papers that don't even talk about research questions. They don't even talk about hypotheses. And this is quite interesting. Sometimes we actually see quantitative papers that actually do not even mention the hypothesis that they are testing. Yeah, and then at the end, towards the end, they say, oh, all the hypotheses should be rejected. Yep. So just remember that if you do not provide all this relevant information, all right, your research model or your methodology could actually portray a very shallow and vague theoretical underpinning. And it's very easy to spot a poor methods, with little theoretical support and pillars. Okay, and sometimes, without research questions and hypotheses and models, right, you actually demonstrate a very inappropriate theoretical augmentation. All right, the problem is not clearly defined. Sometimes there is your research sample. Yep, that is something that is we see quite often that is not really explained well enough. Yep. So it needs to be well-rounded. Yep. The research sample needs to be justified. Yep. Don't always assume that the reviewers actually knows why you chose and how you chose your sample group. Yep. Okay. And sometimes there's nothing that we look at as well. It's about the lack of discussion about competing arguments. Yep. And how do you came out with your constructs? Yep. And we see that very often in quantitative studies, whereby there's no mention about how the constructs were developed. All they say was it was developed based on past measurement skills and past studies. And then they throw in a few references for the past studies without really explaining how these constructs or these studies were actually selected. Yep. So it's very important that yes, past studies may have validated and used these constructs, but how does these constructs actually apply and are related to your study? Yep. So avoid simply just referencing past studies to support your development of constructs. Yeah, without much explanation. Yep. Okay. The other thing we also look at is that the submission, yep, actually provides evidence of a rigorous research designs when there is sufficient information there. Yep, justification and transparency. Yep. So transparency is a big thing because we actually want the more you tell us, the more transparent you are about your methods. Yep. And then there's less guessing involved. Yep. And then we tend to be more reassured that this research design and study has gone through a rigorous methodology process. And that's something we actually look for. Yeah. So it needs to be transparent enough. Yep. Okay. And one other thing we are seeing this very often, that especially in the quantitative studies in SEMs and so on, is that there's actually very little information about how the data has been managed and cleaned. Yep. It's often been presented that this is the data that we're using, this is the construct we're using, bang, this is the results. But the big question, I tend to ask, especially if there's any SEM papers or quantitative papers that comes to me, is that I always ask is how were the constructs actually developed? Yep. Was the construct actually tested? For example, through like a factor analysis, you have to ensure that it actually fits your study. Yep. And one of the things I always ask is, has the data actually been cleaned? Yep. Actually, I check for skewness of the data, kurtosis of the data, and so on. Because to me, all right, there's no point having this awesome SEM models and so on, or quantitative models, yeah, without using a good set of data that has been cleaned and managed properly. Okay, so that's something we look out for. Yeah. So in terms of this section, yep, all I can say is that the lack of information actually results in more questions being asked and suspicion about the study. Okay, so when you're writing up your research design and methodology, always ensure that you provide sufficient clarity. It needs to be clear, right, about the methods, such that the readers, not only the reviewers, but the readers can actually understand and judge the robustness, yep, and understand the confines, yep, when actually interpreting the findings. Okay, so that's something that's important. So like what Sarah was saying, don't simply choose a method, right? Because it's a very fancy method. Okay, it needs to be the best method that is suitable and valid for your research study. Okay, so that's sort of the tips about the research design and methodology. All right, and then next, yep, we have about data analysis. Okay, and this is something I always talk about when you're writing up your data analysis for JHTM. You know, couple of things to look out for. Yep. One, right, you need to actually make sure that what you have interpreted, the results needs to be correct. Okay. Yeah. If you are testing your hypothesis, make sure you actually go through the hypothesis and ensure that you're actually supporting and rejecting the right hypothesis. Okay, because this actually speaks a lot. Yep. About how rigorous and how honest and how truthful your data is. Okay. Do not answer your research question in the analysis. Yeah, so sometimes we see that they combine everything, like methodology, yeah, results and discussion all together, and it gets a bit confusing at times. Yeah, simply reporting data, that's a very common things that we see, whereby the data is being reported. It's a very mechanical approach. Yep, right. These are the hypotheses that we reject. These are the pathway relationships that are, that are showing. Yeah, and there's no explanation, no nothing there. Okay. One of the things that we actually look out for, and this is something that that seems to be happening quite a lot, especially in quantitative research, is about testing the data and retesting the data until you find something significant. Yep, I'm sure we have all done that to some extent, whereby we crunch and test the data until there's a significant p-value, and then we say, all right, our research, is significant. Okay, I actually feel that, yep, we actually need to keep, yep, those variables that are not significant and report them as well, because this is actually a contribution. Yep, so very often than not, we are fearful that if the results are not significant, yep, the research is terrible, which is not true. Yep. So I've actually published research in the past whereby certain variables are not significant, and I'm proud of them, and I report them as it's a good contribution, because it actually sets the scene for future research to actually examine and test, if this study was good, and if the variables work in other settings, right? So please actually do not simply just throw away all those variables that are not significant and just remove them. Okay, you need to report, yep, your data as it is. Okay, all right, and we mentioned about sloppy data analysis, so that's something we should try to avoid. Okay, this is a big one, an interesting one. It's about over and under reporting of your data. Yep, and this applies to both qualitative and quantitative. Yep, so we have seen in qualitative research whereby some studies actually provide the entire interview transcript of every single respondents. Yep, just to kind of justify that the research has gone through a very rigorous process, and these are all the respondents that they have conducted with. Right? But sometimes it might be an overkill as well. So especially in qualitative research, you might develop some certain themes right? Based on your findings, yes, sort them out into different teams. And if you wanted to report some of the interview transcript, yes, maybe do select a few that you want to show that best actually explain the different teams rather than just simply throwing out all the every single interview transcripts that you had. Yeah. And for quantitative research, one of the sort of over reporting is they actually report every single thing. Yep, descriptive analysis. They report on how they clean the data. They report on every single analysis that was conducted. Yep. So sometimes we come across manuscripts that have sort of like 10 to 15 tables in the results. Okay, so I guess tables and figures should be used sparingly, yeah, because whenever you use them, they should mean something. Yeah, so so when you use any tables and figures in your data analysis, yep, to show the results, right? Please use them sparingly. Okay, it does not necessarily mean that the more figures and more tables that you have, all right, actually shows that you know the data analysis is more rigorous. No. Okay, so that's something you look at. All right. So these are some tips about the data analysis and what to avoid. Okay. And then next, conclusion. Okay. And you'd be amazed that people who actually write good research papers actually spend very little time, yep, on the discussion and conclusion there. And I'm not sure why, but maybe because you're exhausted, from all the from the introduction, the lit review and methods and results. And when you come to the conclusion, you say, oh, I had enough of this. But actually the conclusion is, to me, is the essence of the paper there. You actually bring in what you have done, right, in the different sections, the results, the lit review, everything, and you come and you bring it together and say, all right, what have you really found? Yep, to me, it's like your closing statement that you really want to be remembered upon the. Okay, so yeah, what to avoid? One, unsubstantiated claims. Yep, do not actually conclude and make claims, all right, that are unsubstantiated. Yeah, that you have not come out in your findings, that you have not seen in your results, but then you make those claims. Okay, so it's very important. Yeah, be honest about your conclusion. Okay, in the discussion, all right, we often see a lack of compare and contrast. So very interesting in the results, yep, and discussion. There's always a very heavy emphasis on this is what we found. Bang, 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 which is awesome, very good. Okay, but then there's very little sort of reflection, all right? So your results, how is it different or how is it similar to past studies? Yeah, and how is it similar and different to the literature review that you conducted right earlier on? Yeah, so it's quite interesting. Sometimes we actually find that in the discussion, there's actually new literature being introduced. Yep, which shouldn't be the case. Okay, all right. So the discussion section should always be a compare and contrast of your results with the literature review that you conducted earlier on. All right. So this is where you want to actually showcase, how awesome your results are that are different. Some of the new things that you have found out in your results that are different from past studies. Okay. All right. Writing a mini lit review, again, I'm not sure if you are guilty about this. I've done this in my early career stages as well, whereby you just got to carried away, when you discover more literature when you're writing your results. Yep. If this is the case, it's never too late to then go back to your literature and update your lit review then. Yep. So don't be afraid to do that. Yep. And that is actually preferred rather than having a new literature review in the discussion section. Okay. All right. Of course, being too brief and superficial, that's once again, don't do the this is what someone did and who did what and said what approach. All right. Compare and contrast. Yep. And report the results again. And this is something we see quite common. All right. They report the results in the results section. And when it comes to the discussion, they report the results again. And they emphasize again on how important the results are. Okay, which shouldn't be the case. It should really be about comparing your results and contrasting them with the literature review. Okay, so these are some, I guess, very practical tips to think about. Okay, and then finally we come to, all right, let's assume that you submitted your paper, all right, and then gone through the review process, and then there's a decision being made. Okay, so this is a very important stage of the journal submission process. Okay, when you receive your journal decision, yep, based on the reviewer feedback, yep, and the associate editor's feedback, Mustafa and myself, yep, Mariana Sigala, yep, the chief editor makes the call, the final decision. Okay, and this is a very typical rejection sort of letter that we don't want to receive, but this is the facts of life. Okay, so yep, how do you handle reviewer feedback, especially in rejections? Number one is to get used to it. Yep, rejections. You get lots of rejections. Yeah, I'm sure Mustafa can attest to this. Even we do get rejections, all right? We do get rejections in our own journal. So I've actually been rejected in JHTM before. Breaks my heart, but it happens though. Okay? So get used to it, slip on it. Never ever abuse the editors and the reviewers. Yep. Do not burn your bridges. Yep. You should treat all the feedback constructively to strengthen the paper. Yep. So whatever feedback you get, there'll be comments, review comments at the bottom of this email here. All right, work on it, strengthen the paper. Yep. And then you can resubmit to another journal. Okay. And important tip is always work on the rejected paper before resubmitting to another journal. Why? Because there's a very high chance that your paper will be sent to the same reviewers, especially if your research is in a very niche area. All right, then there are so many experts. Okay, all right.
Edmund,
And
sorry interrupt you, because we have only 6 minutes until end of this session, and we have a few questions. If you can wrap up 1 or 2 minutes, so
yep.
we can ask a few questions that we have. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Okay, so rejections. Now first, if it's a revise and resubmit, it's quite obvious. Simply do your best, address the comments, all right? And don't wait for too late to actually resubmit them. Okay, all right. So I'm going to stop here because I think Mustafa have given me the red card. So yes, I'm going to stop here for any questions.
Thank you very much, Edmund, for very comprehensive presentation and discussion for preparing paper and revision. Here we have 2 questions in the chat box. First question, let me ask these 2 questions and you can answer because we have a very limited time. First question is about theory. So what about theoretical role? Some papers are mentioned it properly, but there are also some papers that don't mention about theory at all. So what's the role of theory and theoretical framework in the paper? This first question. And second question, how to make rebuttal when handling reviewers' comment? So how we answer to reviewers' comment when we don't agree with the reviewers' comment?
Okay. All right. So I'll answer the first question first. Right? So in terms of theory, yep, theory is important. It underpins your research study. So whether you have contributed enough to the theoretical contribution, yep, there still needs to be some theory involved. Yep. So if there's no theory involved in the paper, yep, Yep, it's not a good paper in my opinion. Yeah, for a top journal. Yep. However, having said that, sometimes the reviewers or the editors actually make a judgment call. Why? Because the paper may not have theory or might not have strong theoretical framework. However, the practical implications are highly significant. Yep. And sometimes when that happens, yep, the chief editor might make a call and actually allow the paper to be submitted because, yep, of the huge implication it has for the industry and practical. In my opinion, there definitely needs to be some theory involved. Whether it's about extending or not extending, there needs to be some theoretical contributions. With the second question about how do you respond to reviewer comments that you don't agree? Fantastic question. Yep. My approach to this is to be objective. Yep. Be polite. Yeah. Don't burn your bridges. Yep. And make sure if you don't agree to any of the review comments, always give your point of view. Yep. And that is perfectly fine. So you may not agree with a certain point. Yep. You may say, yes, thank you for your suggestion and feedback. Yep. However, after discussion with my team, yep, we feel that our stance on this is XYZ. All right. And we hope that you understand our position on this. And if you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Yep. But it has to be reasonable. You can't disagree with every single reviewer comments. Okay. And you can't put every single reviewer comments that you can't address in the limitations. That's something we see very often. Okay.
Thank you very much. Another question, Edmund, should we write a cover letter to editor to explain further about rebuttals?
Yes, so the cover letter, don't underestimate that. That's one thing that actually helps you because the cover letter gives you this one or two small paragraphs that really helps you to, one, position your paper and to catch the attention of not me or Mustafa, but catch the attention of Mariana, the chief editor. So the cover letter actually, to me, is very important because it helps you to actually position your paper and catches the attention of the chief editor even before, all right, the review begins. Yep, so it is extremely important.
Thank you very much. We have 1 or 2 minutes, so maybe we can accommodate one more question. We don't have question in chat box, but if someone wish to ask question, you can unmute yourself and ask question, just for one question, if anyone. Okay, if not, may I ask the final question? Edmund?
Yes, Mustafa, go ahead.
If we receive some conflicting comment from reviewers, so some reviewer ask about something, but other reviewer agree with our paper and our result and discussion. So what we need to do for this conflicting comment?
Look, I think whenever there's any conflicting comments, the first thing you have to do is to really be objective about both comments and see where how constructive are the comments. Sometimes we might look at this, this reviewer number 2 is just out to get me. Okay. All right. So if you believe that your research study is strong enough, the methods is strong enough, you have done all your research and you stand by it, okay, then don't be afraid to hold your grounds. Yeah. Okay. And don't be afraid to check with the chief editor, yep, or any of us, because that will give you a bit more direction. And ultimately, the chief editor makes the final call. So you may not agree with all the reviewer comments, but try to address as much as possible. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Edmund, and all participants. It was really interesting session. I learned a lot. from Edmund and also the questions. Thank you very much again, Edmund, for a very comprehensive presentation and discussion for preparing manuscript and revision for genre of hospitality and tourism management. I would like to invite all of you for next session. We will have next session in 15 minutes. So next session will be on well-being, so avoiding workplace burnout. So please attend that session to avoid burnout for your academic work. Thank you very much. See you on in next session.
All right. Thank you, everyone. See you.
Bye.